Welcome back to Narrations. Here, you can listen to timeless movies, classic stories, and unforgettable films that generations have grown up with, stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Tonight's movie is It's a Wonderful Life, a Christmas classic about dreams, sacrifice, quiet heroism, and the life we shape without ever realizing its full impact. This is not just a holiday film. It's a story about an ordinary man who mattered more than he ever knew. On a cold Christmas Eve, somewhere above the snow-covered town of Bedford Falls, voices rise in prayer. They are not loud. They are not dramatic. They are whispered hopes, quiet pleas, and desperate wishes, all spoken for the same man. George Bailey. As church bells ring softly below, celestial lights flicker above. The prayers reach the heavens, where angels gather to discuss the life of a man who is at the edge of despair. He is not famous. He is not powerful. But he is deeply loved, even if he does not yet know it. To help him, an angel named Clarence is chosen, gentle, kind, and still trying to earn his wings. Before Clarence can intervene, he must understand who George Bailey is, and why his life matters. And so, the story begins, not at George's darkest moment, but at the very beginning. George Bailey is born in Bedford Falls, a small town where everyone knows each other's names and lives unfolds slowly. From a young age, George is different. He is curious, driven, and full of big dreams. He wants to explore the world, build bridges, design skyscrapers, and escape the limits of a small town. But even as a boy, George shows a rare instinct, a willingness to step in when others need help. When a pharmacist named Mr. Gower accidentally poisons a prescription after receiving devastating news about his son, it is young George who notices. He understands the danger, even as fear shakes his voice. He risks his job, and his safety, to stop the mistake. In doing so, he saves the child's life and spares Mr. Gower from unbearable guilt. Later, George saves his younger brother Harry from drowning in icy water. The rescue costs George his hearing in one ear, but he never complains. Harry lives. That's enough. These moments pass quietly, unnoticed by the world, but they begin to shape George's life in ways he cannot yet see. George grows into a young man full of ambition. He dreams of leaving Bedford Falls behind, attending college, traveling the world, and becoming someone important. He saves money carefully, planning his escape, counting down the days until his life can finally begin. But life, as it often does, intervenes. George's father, Peter Bailey, runs the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan, a small, honest institution that helps working families own homes. It stands in opposition to the cold, powerful businessman Mr. Henry F. Potter, who controls most of Bedford Falls and believes people should remain dependent and desperate. When Peter Bailey dies suddenly, George's plans collapse. The building and loan is at risk of being shut down, swallowed by Potter's control. George steps in, not because he wants to, but because someone has to. He gives a speech to the board, reminding them that the institution exists to serve people, not profits. In that moment, George sacrifices his future for the first time. He gives his college money to Harry and stays behind to keep the building and loan alive. It is a decision that will define the rest of his life. Years pass. George watches others leave town, succeed, and move forward. Harry returns from college a hero, engaged and full of opportunity. Once again, George is prepared to leave, and once again, life intervenes. Harry is offered a job elsewhere. If George leaves now, the building and loan will fail. So George stays. Again. This time, he doesn't just give up his dream, he buries it. George marries Mary Hatch, a woman who has loved him quietly since childhood. Mary sees George clearly. She understands his disappointment, his frustration, his unspoken grief over the life he never lived. She loves him not for who he might have been, but for who he is. Together they build a life, modest and perfect, full of warmth. They raise children. They repair an old house slowly, lovingly. The walls are thin. The roof leaks. But the home is alive with laughter and care. George becomes a pillar of Bedford Falls. He helps families buy homes. He supports neighbors through hardship. He offers patience instead of profit. He gives and gives and gives, often without thanks. And slowly, something dangerous grows inside him. Resentment. Not loud. Not obvious. Quiet. Every year that passes feels like another door closing. Every dream deferred feels heavier. George begins to feel trapped, responsible for everyone else's happiness while his own slips away unnoticed. Meanwhile, Mr. Potter grows richer, more powerful, and more ruthless. He offers George a lucrative job, wealth, travel, and status beyond anything George has ever known. For a moment, George is tempted. But Potter's offer comes with a price. George would have to abandon the building and loan, and the people who depend on it. Once again, George refuses. Once again, he chooses others over himself. The weight of these choices accumulates silently, year after year, until George barely recognizes himself anymore. And then comes Christmas Eve. A routine day turns catastrophic when a simple mistake occurs. A large sum of money goes missing, money that does not belong to George, but for which he is responsible. Potter finds it and keeps silent, knowing exactly what this loss will do. The threat is immediate and devastating. George faces prison, public disgrace, the collapse of the building and loan, the ruin of his family. Overwhelmed, exhausted, and convinced that his life has amounted to nothing but failure, George reaches his breaking point. As snow falls gently over Bedford Falls, George Bailey stands alone, believing the world would be better off without him. And that belief, that one ordinary life doesn't matter, is the most dangerous lie of all. Snow continues to fall softly over Bedford Falls as George Bailey walks through the quiet streets, his mind racing, his heart unbearably heavy. Every familiar place now feels like a reminder of failure. The building and loan. His home. The faces of people he's helped over the years. Instead of pride, he feels only shame. Inside his house, Cabes brews quietly. Mary tries to hold things together, unaware of the full extent of the disaster unfolding. Friends and neighbors arrive with concern, sensing something is wrong. But George cannot face them. He feels exposed, cornered, and convinced that he has finally reached the end of his usefulness. George wanders into a small bar, seeking silence, perhaps numbness. He orders a drink and stares into nothing, muttering prayers that sound more like apologies than requests. He lashes out at strangers, at the bartender, at anyone who crosses his path, not out of cruelty, but desperation. The pressure he has carried for decades finally erupts. He leaves the bar and makes his way to the bridge at the edge of town, the wind biting, the water rushing violently below. George stands there, staring down, believing with absolute certainty that everyone would be better off if he had never existed. At that moment, something unexpected happens. A splash breaks the silence. Someone has jumped into the water ahead of him. Without thinking, without hesitation, George dives in after him. Instinct overrides despair. He saves a life. The man he pulls from the icy water is Clarence Oddbody, an elderly, gentle soul who introduces himself calmly as an angel. Clarence speaks softly, awkwardly, but with unmistakable sincerity. He explains that he was sent to help George, because George prayed for help. George laughs bitterly. He doesn't believe Clarence. He barely believes in himself anymore. But as they talk, George's pain spills out in raw honesty. He tells Clarence he feels trapped, forgotten, and worthless. He says the words he's never allowed himself to say out loud. "I wish I'd never been born." Clarence hears him. And grants the wish. The world shifts. The familiar streets of Bedford Falls remain, but something feels wrong. Cold. Sharper. Stranger. George notices that people no longer recognize him. Shopkeepers ignore him. Faces pass without acknowledgement. Even his own name seems to mean nothing. Clarence gently explains the truth. This is the world as it would be if George Bailey had never existed. Bedford Falls is gone. In its place stands Pottersville, loud, cruel, neon-lit, and hostile. Where homes once stood, bars and gambling halls thrive. Where community once existed, isolation reigns. George searches desperately for familiar faces. He finds Mr. Gower, the pharmacist, no longer a kind, broken man saved from a terrible mistake, but a bitter outcast ruined by a tragedy George once prevented. He finds Bert, the policeman, hardened, suspicious, and unkind. He finds Violet, no longer playful and hopeful, but worn down by survival. Worst of all, he finds Mary. She is older. Alone. Never married. Never loved the life she might have had. Without George, she closed herself off from the world, living quietly and cautiously, untouched by the warmth she once carried. George's heart breaks as the truth becomes undeniable. Without him, his brother Harry never survived childhood. Without Harry, lives that were saved during the war were lost. Without George's sacrifices, countless families never owned homes. Dreams never took root. Kindness never multiplied. Every small act George once thought insignificant created ripples far beyond his understanding. George runs through Pottersville in terror, calling out names, begging people to recognize him. But no one does. He is a stranger in a world he helped shape, and now cannot belong to. Overwhelmed, George collapses into snow, crying out desperately for one thing: his life back. The world shifts again. Snow falls gently. Church bells ring. Familiar streets reappear. George Bailey is back in Bedford Falls. Alive. Known. Loved. The missing money no longer matters. Prison no longer matters. Shame evaporates under a flood of relief and gratitude. George runs through the streets laughing, shouting greetings, embracing the world with a joy he hasn't felt since childhood. He rushes home, apologizing to Mary, hugging his children, overwhelmed with happiness simply to exist. He welcomes consequences now, because life itself has revealed its value. But something extraordinary happens. One by one, neighbors arrive. People George has helped over the years, quietly, patiently, without expectation, fill the house. They bring money. They bring support. They bring forgiveness. Even those with little give what they can. Harry arrives last. He raises a toast. To my big brother George, the richest man in town. Clarence's message appears quietly in a book, reminding George that no one is poor who has friends. The bells ring loudly. Clarence earns his wings. And George Bailey finally understands the truth that eluded him all his life. His dreams mattered. But so did his sacrifices. And the life he lived, though ordinary, was extraordinary in its impact. It's a Wonderful Life is a story about how deeply one person can matter without ever realizing it. About how quiet goodness shapes the world in ways we never see. And about how hope can be restored, even at the darkest moment. If you enjoy listening to classic movies, timeless Christmas stories, and films that stay with you long after the season ends, you'll find many more stories like this here. Like the video if this story moved you, share it with someone who loves classic films, and subscribe for more movie narrations throughout the year. Thanks for listening, and Merry Christmas.